And I want to say thank you, Minister, for coming into the House today. Minister, we're on the brink of a full-scale war in Israel and Palestine, with Israel bombing Gaza and Hamas firing rockets. The only way to stop this horrific spiral of violence and displacement is to end Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine and its violent oppression of the Palestinian people. And I strongly believe now the Irish government should sanction Israel for breaching international law and committing crimes against humanity by passing the Occupied Territories Bill. Human Rights Watch, one of the most respected human rights organisations in the world, and B'Tselem, one of the most respected Israeli human rights organisations, both recently concluded that Israel is committing crimes against humanity against the Palestinian people. Now, possibly the only way to stop this horrific cycle of Israel's violent displacement of Palestinians from their homes and the daily punishment of innocent families, the Israel bombing Gaza, is to make the economic cost of this conflict too high to bear. Ireland was at the forefront of the campaign which ended apartheid in South Africa, and we can end Israeli apartheid. Condemnation just is not enough anymore. It can be ignored. And it's only when there are consequences for Israel will it end the discrimination and oppression. Most EU states, including Ireland, are rightly calling for an immediate de-escalation of hostilities to save lives. But calling for de-escalation without any meaningful plan for what comes next is gaslighting. Western leaders can call for de-escalation, but when the fighting stops, then what's going to happen? Everything goes back to normal, but normal just means institutionalised discrimination and apartheid, with widespread injustice across the West Bank, Jerusalem and Gaza. And those same Western leaders will accept this return to normal and move on to the next issue, refusing to take any real action or ensure accountability. Breaking the cycle of violence requires de-escalation, but it also requires political will and action from the international community. Do not gaslight the many Palestinians and Israelis who want to see a just and lasting peace by calling for de-escalation today when the issue is in the news, but abdicating any responsibility tomorrow. The Palestinian people have been abandoned by the international community, but Ireland can take a stand and progress the Occupied Territories Bill. The government has said that they received legal advice from the Attorney General that EU trade agreements prevent Ireland acting unilaterally on this issue. They also said Ireland could face many millions of euros in EU fines for introducing such a law. The government's contention that the bill would contravene EU law has been challenged by Professor Tritimus, a barrister and one of Europe's top legal experts on EU law, who wrote a legal opinion for the bill citing previous decisions upholding the right of a member state to unilaterally ban imports from a country. Ireland can unilaterally ban imports from the occupied territories under a provision which allows it to take decisions based on public policy. The government's position that we would be breaking EU law can be challenged at the European Court of Justice. Make the case and then let the court decide. Sometimes laws are there to be changed and the dial to be moved. That can only be done by testing the law, and that is what we should be doing here. The Irish government regularly states that it and our diplomats speak up for human rights of Palestinians at the EU and UN Security Council. Will the Minister make a statement on what specific actions Ireland will now take at national, EU and UN level in response to the extensive human rights violations and military assault on civilian targets currently being conducted by the Israeli government? Does the Minister accept that statements of condemnation have not been and are not sufficient? Does he acknowledge that a response based on international human rights must demonstrate seriousness about those human rights by following through with appropriate diplomatic and economic action? And what such actions will Ireland be taking and advocating for others to take? Virtually every other tactic has been tried, Minister, for decades to stop Israel's oppression of the Palestinian people. The Occupied Territories Bill may be the first step in bringing freedom to Palestine and peace to the region.
Thank you, Senator. Minister.
Thank you very much, Laska Éireann. And Senator, thank you for raising this issue. I would just like, before I begin, obviously to acknowledge that Minister Coveney can't be here. I do know that Minister Coveney engaged with you yesterday on this and spoke to you at some length in relation to it. So Obviously, I would first like to restate the government's deep concern at the intensification of violence in Gaza, the West Bank and in Israel. And now is the time, as you would correctly point out, for de-escalation before further loss of life. We need to encourage all efforts to reach a ceasefire. These events are terrifying for both Palestinian and Israeli civilians. The number of child casualties is unbelievably shocking. The protection of all civilians is of paramount importance, and it is an obligation under international humanitarian law. Ireland has been very vocal, as I think you would also acknowledge, in its condemnation of the escalating situation in the Middle East. Yesterday, Minister Coveney addressed the Security Council, which met in emergency session. He called for the Council to condemn the violence that all parties must adhere to international humanitarian law and respect human rights. And adherence to international law is absolutely critical. Minister Coveney has also spoken to his counterparts in the Middle East region to underline the need to protect civilians and to bring an end to this violence and move towards a political engagement. EU foreign ministers will meet tomorrow in an extraordinary session to discuss the issue. The overall human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory remains a matter of really serious concern. The protection and promotion of human rights is an integral part of Ireland's foreign policy, and we are consistently seek to raise our concerns on human rights issues through the most appropriate and effective channels. Our active participation at the UN Human Rights Council is particularly important for us in that regard. Ireland is a consistent and strong supporter of interactive dialogues with the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory, at the Human Rights Council and the UN General Assembly. At the most recent session of the Human Rights Council in March, Ireland made a statement under item 7 during the general debate, which restated our commitment to the principles of accountability and emphasised that Ireland will continue to speak out against unilateral actions which are in breach of international humanitarian law. Ireland regularly conveys our concerns on human rights issues to Israeli authorities, both directly and through the EU. Minister Coveney raised these concerns with the Israeli ambassador last week. We also provide financial support to Israeli and Palestinian NGOs working on human rights issues. In respect of the Occupied Territories Bills, Senator Black, you are obviously aware, and well aware, I know from your own contribution, of the government's position that the bill is not and will not be compatible with EU law and will not be implementable. That is clear legal advice on the matter, which the government has actually received from 2 Attorney Generals at this point. And as a government which is so strongly committed to international law and the observance of international law as a solution, it obviously, if it's not legal, it therefore will not be something that we would be taking forward. We have consistently and strongly opposed settlements. We'll continue to do so. Ireland is very clear on the illegality of Israel's settlement policy, which can only be seen as a strategy to just take possession of Palestinian lands, and that is fundamentally undermining the two-state solution and a future Palestinian state. The events of the past few days have not happened, obviously, in isolation. They come after settlement expansion. They come after threats of violence and violence against Palestinians in particular. Ireland remains firmly committed to a negotiated two-state solution based on international law, the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions and the agreed parameters. And thank you for raising the issue, Senator. Thank you, Oscar Hirlock.
Senator.
Gurmahakut, thank you, Minister. And first of all, I want to put on the record today that I do thank the Minister for calling me last night. And I know he would have been here himself this morning if he could have been. So I just want to put that on the record today. I suppose you have to understand my frustration, Minister. I mean, like, it's very, very difficult to watch what's happening in Gaza and children and families being killed. And not only that, but their homes are being destroyed. They're given 58 seconds to leave their home. I mean, what kind of a world are we living in? And what I would ask, Minister, and I know Minister Simon Coveney is very passionate on this issue. I really know that. And I understand where he's coming from. But I would ask the government to be open to looking at what Professor Tridimus, his opinion, and Senator Michael McDowell and Michael Crawford, they're all experts in this issue. And I would also ask that that the government publish the Attorney General's advice, because I think that would be really beneficial for the people of this country to see what the Attorney General is saying, so as that we can argue and see and talk and debate about this. That's my ask today. Let's see the Attorney General's advice. And thank you again, Minister, for coming in today.
Thank you, Senator Black. Minister.
Thank you very much, Senator. I would agree with you. It is incredibly difficult to see the pictures and see the absolute horror of what is taking place, to see people who are effectively trapped in Gaza, coming under the most sustained, very, very sophisticated military weaponry with absolutely nowhere to go. And I think we all take aboard the horror of what we have seen. And also, obviously, the impact in Israel of rockets coming in an uncontrolled way and landing on civilian populations there as well. But what is happening in Gaza, particularly to children, is something that is so absolutely awful. Obviously, in relation to the Occupied Territories Bill, as I said to you in my opening contribution, we are guided by the advice of two Attorney Generals. I fully empathise and understand where you're coming from on this, and the need and the want for people to see something and the concern they have about the settlements. But I do think it is really important, as Minister Coveney has said very clearly, we want to engage with all the partners, we want to engage with, particularly with our EU partners, we want to act collectively together to bring about the solution, as I mentioned, that is desired by everybody, which in this immediate case is a cessation, obviously, of the current violence. And I think the best way for us to do that, though, is to adhere to law. And if we have that advice from the AGs, and it's not just one at this stage, it is two, saying that we cannot progress, I don't think we, in setting out on a course of action, should do something which we're told as a government is not legal and therefore we cannot do. But obviously we want to work towards a solution. So thank you very much for the opportunity for you raising this today. Thank you,
Thank you, Senator Black, for continuing your work with the people of Israel. And thank you, Minister. I'm going to use one of your lines. Some injustices can be corrected for the world to see. So I hope you do all you can. Thank you.